This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from New York, ABC News medical editor Dr. Timothy Johnson.
AIDS is the kind of disease that highlights and intensifies all kinds of social and legal issues that often go beyond the disease itself. Job discrimination, school restrictions, insurance coverage, just to name a few. Tonight we are going to look at another issue that involves both medical practice and social ethics. Whether or not doctors should be allowed to help people without medical hope to die before the time of natural death. And once again, AIDS patients are the focus of a debate which could affect us all. ABC's Chris Bury reports.
At the age of 39, David Kaju is wasting away under a death sentence from AIDS.
We're talking 6 months. And is that really... It's not living. It's not living.
Except for liquids, he can no longer eat. Even breathing is painful. Suicide is no stranger to his thoughts.
Would you consider suicide?
Yes. Yes.
At what point?
Right now. Don't feel good at all. And even if it got me better, how long would it last? There's no chance of me getting any better again. Why not? I think it's a good idea.
Suicide is an idea so common among AIDS patients, doctors say, that nearly all consider it during their illness.
Suicide prevention.
1 of every 10 calls to San Francisco's suicide hotline is from someone with AIDS. In a city where the number of diagnosed cases is nearly 5,000 and still rising, the medical examiner sees suicide as a deadly companion to the epidemic.
Since there's more people with AIDS, more people at risk, there is an increase in suicides associated with AIDS.
Keith was a high-flying skydiver until he contracted AIDS. At age 28, he chose death over a life of debilitating cancer.
He had lived a very good life, and he wanted a very good death.
Keith's friend, Marty James, emptied 30 barbiturates into a glass of grape juice so Keith could end his life.
There were no convulsions, no discomfort that I could see. It was quiet, it was peaceful.
It was also against the law.
Were you aware that you could go to jail for helping Keith?
I'm completely aware of the fact that in California it's a felony and that I could serve up to 5 years in the state penitentiary, yes.
It is illegal for anyone, including doctors, to aid a suicide.
I've talked to my nurse, talked to my doctor, outright about suicide, asking them, will this work, will that work, will this work? They won't give me any answers naturally.
So some AIDS patients find their answers elsewhere. Now appearing in gay newspapers are ads from the Hemlock Society. The group advocates euthanasia, or mercy killing for the terminally ill, and publishes do-it-yourself guides to suicide. They include tables that spell out exactly what drugs to get, their brand names, and how many it takes to kill yourself.
We publish a book on how to take your life. We update that book all the time with our newsletter, listing the drugs, the latest drugs, where they can be purchased, where they're on the market.
Some are available over the counter in Mexico or under the table in this country. In Los Angeles, deadly doses of barbiturates are stockpiled for AIDS victims by a network in the gay community.
The network exists as long as there are doctors who aren't willing to support active voluntary euthanasia, as long as it's a crime. That's the bottom line.
We're trying to get the Humane and Dignified Death Act on the November ballot for people to vote on.
In California, a petition drive is underway to change state law so doctors could help dying people commit suicide.
Helping a patient to die is part of good medicine.
Specifically, California's proposed Humane and Dignified Death Act would allow dying patients to request that a doctor terminate their lives swiftly, painlessly, and humanely. Under the proposal, 2 physicians would have to certify the patient's death is likely to occur within 6 months. The doctor would be protected from legal liability and could refuse the request.
Doctors don't participate in executions, period.
To organized medicine, the proposal amounts to medical murder.
There's not a hell of a lot of difference between a gun and a lethal dose of morphine. It's the same process. It's just one is a little crude, and we don't want to be crude. But damn it, it is crude. Killing people is crude.
Under the current practice, the patient is allowed a slow and suffering death.
But even some doctors believe killing can be an act of compassion.
I'm looking for a way out that's humane and dignified.
San Francisco psychiatrist Stephen Yarnell is dying of AIDS. He is an outspoken advocate of doctor-assisted suicide.
I would like my physician to participate fully and openly in this decision, since he's the source of information that I would have to rely on for making my decision as to when to call it an end.
Removing terminally ill patients from life supports, pulling the plug, is now a generally accepted medical and legal practice. But actively helping patients end their lives pushes the debate to a new ethical frontier.
It's really different to stop trying to keep somebody alive and actually start trying to promote their death. Feels different.
How does it feel different? What do you mean?
Well, you feel as though you're killing someone.
Doctors with large AIDS practices say there is a middle ground between hideous death and suicide, that good medical care and the right drugs can ease most suffering.
I think dignity can be provided to a terminally ill patient without actually killing the patient.
And like Roy Gray, most AIDS patients who consider suicide choose life instead.
Well, you ought to live as long as you can, even if you're not really functioning very well.
Francis Jess, Mary Ann Aveda,
Weber, Peter Sullivan, Hal Emery.
But as more lives are lost to AIDS, there are new demands for legal rights to determine how those lives will end.
We turn over to the care of the living God.
So for the first time anywhere, Californians may decide if it is compassionate or criminal for doctors to help sick people die, and whether physicians who are sworn to help heal their patients should also have the power to kill them.
My attitude is, Doc, if you can help me, good. If not, and I'm too sick, show me the way out.
Later, we will be joined by a leading specialist on medical ethics, Dr. Daniel Callahan. But first, when we come back, we'll talk with two people on opposite sides of the question of mercy killing. Marty James, who has been assisting people who have wanted to end their own lives, and Dr. Richard Corlin, former president of the Los Angeles County Medical Association. Marty James, who joins us from our Los Angeles bureau, is the founder and former head of the Shante Foundation of West Hollywood, an organization that provides counseling for people with AIDS and for their loved ones. He has also given counsel and assistance to people who have wanted to end their own lives because of illness. Mr. James was himself diagnosed as a person with AIDS-related complex just 3 weeks ago. Also with us from Los Angeles is Dr. Richard Corlin, a practicing physician, Speaker of the House of Delegates of the California Medical Association, and an active opponent of the move to legalize assisted suicide in California. Mr. James, just as a matter of clarification for the record, you have openly acknowledged you're being involved in some cases of assisted suicide. Are you in any current legal jeopardy because of that?
I don't know, actually. There could be some possible repercussions, but because of the strong feelings I have surrounding this issue, I felt it was important to come forward.
So far, you have not been approached by the legal system?
So far, I have not been approached.
Why is it so essential, given the fact that people can commit suicide on their own when they wish to have physicians involved? Why are you so insistent on physician-assisted termination of life?
My experience in the past has been that those patients who have attempted to take their own lives without assistance, I've seen incredibly botched jobs, patients who are in coma on respirators, who are found out before the body has been allowed to die. Also, it's an emotional burden on those of us who assist. Our activities are shrouded in secrecy. Our activities are highly illegal. Those of us who participate in assisting those to carry out voluntary euthanasia to end their lives, in essence, have no support. Part of my healing into the world as it were, has been to show up and tell the truth about my experience. What I did was nothing really extraordinary. It's rather ordinary, and it happens every day in this country.
So you're asking both for some medical expertise, but it sounds as though you are also asking someone else to lift some of the burden from your shoulders.
Definitely. I think that's appropriate. In my own situation, right now I am just diagnosed with AIDS-related complex. However, should it develop into full-blown AIDS and I am faced with a terminal situation, I would feel confident and would want the opportunity to go to my physician and with my loved ones around me, have him administer a lethal dose of barbiturates.
All right, Dr. Corlin, if our duty, our obligation as physicians is ultimately to relieve suffering, why should that not include the kind of psychic suffering that can occur with a terminal illness?
I think there's several reasons for that. First of all, it is morally wrong for physicians to deliberately participate in killing patients. And despite the fact that we use a variety of different euphemisms, that really is the issue that is before us and may be on our ballot in California.
I have to disagree with that.
You're entitled to disagree, but that really is what it is.
We'll come back to that issue, Mr. James. Let him finish his reasoning.
The second problem, and it's a very specific problem, even if you can get beyond the moral impropriety of this issue, is the fact that what is before us on the ballot in November is a statement which says that two doctors will be asked to determine in their best estimate that somebody has less than 6 months to live, and at that point they can, if they so choose, give somebody an injection to end their lives. 6 months to live is not a terminal situation, first of all. Secondly, we have all seen circumstances over and over and over again where people were adjudged to have 6 months or less to live and have lived far beyond that point. I can think of one particular case who happens to be an AIDS patient who in October of last year was told that he was terminal, he should simply go home and remain comfortable, and that he would not live until Thanksgiving. He not only is alive now, but he is in essentially the same condition as he was in October.
Mr. James, doesn't that possibility...
We do not have the ability to accurately diagnose when somebody is within 6 months of the end of their life.
Mr. James, doesn't the possibility of a wrong diagnosis or a confused mental state, even caused by the disease itself on the part of the patient, bother you that a bad decision might be made?
No, it's individual. It's case by case. My friend Keith, who I assisted to take his own life, was in such a debilitated condition. He was manifesting malignant tumors in his lungs. He had suffered with AIDS-related complex for 7 to 8 years. Twice before that, indeed, he had been told to go home and prepare to die. Each time he rallied. This was over a course of 8 years. When he was finally given the terminal diagnosis, it became an issue for him of the quality of life. And for him, his dying was, in fact, healing.
All right. We're going to have to take an interruption at this point. We will be back, and when we return, we will be joined by a specialist in medical ethics, Dr. Daniel Callahan, who has been studying the Humane and Dignified Death Act that's been proposed for California. Daniel Callahan is an author and medical ethicist who is also director of the Hastings Center in New York, a research institute that focuses on ethical issues in medicine, biology, and the social sciences. He joins us now in our New York studios. Dr. Callahan, isn't the use of the word killing somewhat pejorative in a situation where a person is clearly destined to die very shortly and merely chooses voluntarily to hasten the process?
I think that's a very accurate term, however. It certainly has a pejorative flavor to it, but it is, in fact, the deliberate ending of someone's life by a decisive action, and I think legally that's what we call killing.
But
typically.
Leaving the legal definition
Leaving the legal definition aside, yes, it's killing, but it seems to me the question, there can be justified and unjustified killing. If we defend ourselves against an attacker, we kill the attacker, but we consider that justified. So I think the use of the term killing is acceptable enough and should not just by itself carry the weight of the argument here.
Having studied the act and heard the arguments so far tonight, what's your position?
My position is that active euthanasia is morally wrong and a social mistake of the first order. I can well understand the suffering that people go through, and I think it's very difficult for those of us who oppose euthanasia not to come across as sounding indifferent to suffering or somehow unwilling to see people have their pain relieved. My own feeling is, my gosh, any of us might want to see our life come to an end. None of us want to die in great pain and suffering. But I think we have to ask a larger social question. We have to ask, what kind of a role do we put doctors in if we have them killing? I mean, after all, we give physicians special knowledge how to use poisons, how to really cure the body in many cases by harming the body. That's a kind of paradox of medicine. It seems to me it's a kind of misuse of that knowledge to bring life to an end. And of course there is a tradition of the relief of suffering in medicine, but not relief at all costs. The Hippocratic Oath, after all, has a passage against the use of poisons to relieve pain with patients, and so it's a part of medicine that there have to be some limits.
Are Dutch physicians who clearly are doing this less ethically sensitive or less moral than we are?
I think they can be ethically sensitive, but I think they can be less moral indeed. It seems to me we can't judge all moral questions by sensitivity. We really have to ask, what are the consequences of actions of this sort? What does it mean to take a life? Can we authorize another person to take our life? I think it's at least a question whether we have a right to take our own life, and I can't stop somebody from committing suicide, but I don't know that I can give someone else a right to kill me. That seems to me a right we can't give other people.
Mr. James, why would not adequate pain relief that would eliminate all suffering but not actually cause death be sufficient?
Well, particularly in the case of Keith, whom I assisted on November 18th, it was an issue of the quality of life.
But if, in fact, a person is relieved of suffering to the point where they're not even aware of their suffering, then how is quality the issue?
To Keith, it would be no quality at all if he were to be looking up at me 4 months down the line from a hospital bed, incoherent, unaware of where he was, and his body just literally rotting away beneath him. He was complete. He was ready for his next perfect step. He saw his taking his own life as a healing into life, as it were, as making the next perfect step.
Dr. Corlin, one of the real fears terminal patients of all sorts have is that we physicians will not do an adequate job of pain relief and of relieving suffering. Is that fear grounded in fact?
I think in many cases it has been. One of the things that we as physicians have come to realize, though, is that we have gone beyond our interest and our concern and our attachment just to the technical advances that we've made. We can prolong life beyond the ability to do so. In many cases, that has increased people's suffering. We are far more sensitive to it as physicians than we used to be. We do not prolong life to the very last heartbeat, regardless of what has been done. There are circumstances in which there is less than everything which is indicated to be done, depending upon the patient's condition and the patient's diagnosis. We are far more concerned with keeping them more comfortable in the terminal phases of their life. But it is a quantum leap, and I believe a mistaken leap, from there to say, I will actively do something to help this patient to die.
Psychic suffering is not a legitimate request.
I'm sorry?
Psychic suffering is not a legitimate reason.
I don't believe it is. It really isn't. This is a difficult question. I don't know 100% what the correct answer is, but I do know what the wrong answer is, okay. And this is the wrong answer.
We do have to take another break. We'll be back in a minute and continue our discussion with all three of our guests. Continuing our discussion, Mr. James, before the break, you wanted to make a point, please.
On the issue of pain control, I'm aware that there is a limit to the amount of narcotics such as morphine that a physician can administer to a client, to a patient rather, without them succumbing to the effects of that. I have worked with dozens of terminal AIDS patients who were on the limit, the highest possible dosage of pain medication, and still there was excruciating pain, excruciating discomfort.
Dr. Corlin, that does seem to be a bone of contention. Do physicians stop short of relieving pain because they're worried about possibly going over the edge?
I don't think so, not in most circumstances. There is no such thing as the highest possible dose of any pain medication. Enough medication can be used under virtually every circumstance, not to give the most perfect quality of life, but to very, very substantially reduce the amount of suffering which is going on.
Dr. Callahan, you deal with these issues all the time on a wide basis. Are you satisfied that physicians are doing an adequate job in most cases, all cases?
I'm not as optimistic myself. I think there have been pretty good studies and reports, in fact, that first of all, physicians are not given very good training in pain relief, and secondly, that there is a great deal of nervousness in going very close to the line where it might shorten the patient's life. So I have a very strong sense that physicians could do a much better job. They need to be better educated. They need to be more sensitive to patients' needs. And I think they have to be far less worried than they are about malpractice and other things that inhibit doing what I think many of them know they ought to be doing.
Quick question to you. Why isn't psychic suffering an adequate reason?
I think it seems to me that physicians ought to relieve the pain of the body. But once you get into psychic suffering, you're really asking physicians to help people manipulate the quality of their lives. That seems to me to go beyond the role of the physician. The doctor cannot be asked to help people achieve quality of life, much less to take their life in the name of a quality of life. Seems to me a kind of insupportable paradox.
Okay, we are flat out of time. Interesting discussion, an important one. I wish we could continue, but we can't. I thank you all for joining us, and that is our report for tonight. I'm Dr. Timothy Johnson in New York. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been Nightline, a presentation of ABC News.